Critical realism. Critical realists are kind of like the activist, social justice warrior kids in high school. They're the ones who are digging really deep into the unfair stuff going on around them. And they're not just pointing out problems, they're trying to understand how they affect people and what they can do to make things better. In this video, we're going to dive into the world of critical realism and figure out what it's all about. I'm Dr. Elizabeth Yardley, and on this channel I have made it my mission to demystify the jargon and the complex terminology that exists in the world of academia. And paradigms are one of those things that feel quite intimidating, that feel quite impenetrable. And a lot of the academic writing on them does not help. Anyone who's picked up a textbook or a paper about paradigms, about theoretical frameworks, you might have ended up feeling more confused than you started out, and you are not alone. I'm trying to make these things accessible and relatable because they are not as complex as many people think they are. And this video is the final part in a series all about paradigms. I will link to the playlist on the screen, but essentially what I've been doing in this series is explaining what paradigms are and then looking in detail at three key social science research paradigms. So we've looked at positivism, we've looked at interpretivism. In this video, we're looking at critical realism. So if that is something that is of interest to you, go binge that. Now, before we dive into critical realism, I want to have a quick recap of what I mean when I say paradigms and ontology and epistemology, just so we're all on the same page, okay? So paradigms, quick recap. Now, imagine the landscape of social research like a bustling high school where you've got cliques of different kids. You've got your artsy creative types, you've got your social justice warriors, you've got your jocks, you've got your geeks. Now, all of these different groups of kids attach differing degrees of importance to particular things. They have ways of dressing, ways of behaving, ways of making sense of the world. And I use this high school cliques analogy to make sense of some of the key research paradigms in social sciences. So firstly, positivists. I would compare them to the science geeks, who are diligently pursuing the hard facts and the objective truths. The interpretivists, on the other hand, are like the artsy creative crowd at high school, valuing people's thoughts and feelings and treasuring the stories that they bring to the table. And finally, the critical realists, who we're looking at in this video. For me, they stand out as the activists, the social justice warriors, diving deep into systemic inequalities and trying to do something about them. Now, before we dive into critical realism, if you are thinking about adopting a critical realist approach in your dissertation, your PhD, I want to know about it. Drop a comment below and spill the beans. What's your research about? What are you studying? Why are you passionate about it? Let's get some conversations going in the comments, because when it comes to paradigms, it's something that people don't talk about very often, and I want us to start talking about it, so get typing below. Seriously, I am like super geeky curious about other people's research, so tell me all about it in the comments. Don't hold back, let's get the conversation going. Okay, so ontology and epistemology, a quick recap. As we've seen in the previous three videos, when we're talking about paradigms, we need to be super clear what we mean by ontology and epistemology. So let's quickly whiz through that now. And quick side note, if you want to dive much deeper into ontology and epistemology, I will pop a link to a video on the screen now that will help you do that. So first up, ontology. Ontology is like asking what's out there. It's about figuring out exactly what it is that we're studying. When we look at the social world, do we see it as something fixed and unchanging, kind of like a building that is there whether we look at it or not? If so, we're taking a realist approach. Or do we see the social world as something that is constantly changing and evolving in response to the things that we do within it? Something that's influenced by our actions and our interactions. Like a home that we're constantly changing and adapting and decorating and redecorating. If so, we're taking a social constructivist approach. Epistemology, on the other hand, is more about asking, how do we know what's out there? It's about how we study the social world. Do we seek to explain things and identify the causes? If so, we're taking a positivist approach. Or do we try to understand things and identify their meanings? If so, we're taking an interpretivist view. Okay, after that very quick whistle-stop tour of paradigms, ontology and epistemology, we're ready for critical realism, so let's dive in. So the critical realists, like the activist social justice warrior kids in high school, they focus on uncovering deeper structures and mechanisms whilst fighting for social justice. Let's explore the key principles. Critical realists believe that there is quite a clear distinction between the real world and the observable world. There's a difference between what's real and what we can actually see and measure. The real stuff is like the big picture that exists on its own, whilst what we observe is shaped by our own experience and perspectives, through what's observable or empirical. It's kind of like when a scientist conducts an experiment. They create the experiment, they get all the equipment out, they get it going, and they see the results. However, the results are caused by underlying theoretical mechanisms, structures and laws that they can't observe directly. Much in the same way as we can't directly observe gravity, but we know that it's there because we can see its effects, like objects falling to the ground. Similarly, critical realists argue that whilst we can observe events in the social world, there are underlying structures that shape them. Things that might not be immediately apparent, things that we can't see. So according to critical realists, the things that we can't see cause the things that we can see. And the social world can only be understood if people get that. Critical realists use the concepts of the empirical, the actual and the real to make sense of this. So let's walk through an example. The example that we're looking at is poverty. So firstly, the empirical. This is the observable aspect of poverty, the tangible signs that we can see, like people living on the streets, struggling to afford basic necessities, or relying on food banks to feed their families. These are the visible day-to-day realities of poverty that we can directly observe in our communities. Next up, the actual. So we're moving beyond what we can see on the surface. The actual layer delves into how poverty plays out in real life. So it considers the interactions between individuals, social institutions, government policies, economic systems and cultural norms. These are the things that perpetuate poverty, and it's about understanding the complex web of factors and dynamics that contribute to the existence and persistence of poverty in society. So these are processes that go on, these are things that happen that we can't necessarily see. And finally, we arrive at the real. This is where critical realism really shines, in my humble opinion. The real layer goes deeper, beyond what's immediately visible, to uncover the underlying structures and mechanisms that give rise to poverty in the first place. So these are the systemic things like unequal distribution of wealth, lack of access to education and healthcare, discrimination based on race or gender, economic policies that favour the wealthy over the marginalised. These are the invisible but powerful forces that shape and perpetuate poverty, often operating beyond our immediate perception. So in the example of poverty, critical realists argue that what we can see on the surface, the empirical, is actually just the tip of the iceberg. The actual layer reveals the complex dynamics that play in perpetuating poverty, whilst the real layer uncovers the deep-rooted structural inequalities. And these are the foundations upon which poverty is built. And critical realists argue that we need to recognise all of these layers. We need to recognise what's going on at each of these levels if we're to combat poverty in our communities. If you're finding this video helpful, insightful, revealing, please take the time to give it a thumbs up because it's really valuable in helping other people find it. So let's think about ontology and epistemology and where the critical realists stand on that. So in terms of ontology, critical realists believe that there are deeper underlying structures that exist in the world that aren't always evident, that we can't always see. These things are real, they exist independently of us. They're there beneath the surface. So while we can see the tangible signs of poverty in our communities, critical realists argue that there are things causing poverty that we can't see. Those deeper systemic issues and inequalities that live beneath the surface. Now, in terms of epistemology, which is about the how question, how do we go about researching the social world, critical realists say that it's really important to recognise the difference between what's observable and what is real but might not be immediately visible. They want a holistic approach that acknowledges the stuff that we can see and the stuff we can't see. This means recognising that our understanding of social issues like poverty are shaped by our perspectives and experiences. But it also encourages us to look beyond the surface and examine the systemic issues at play. So an example of critical realist research. The example that we're looking at is this study, this fascinating study that I will link to in the description. It's about clinical photographers who take pictures of wounds in a UK clinic. It's massively helpful in seeing how those concepts of the empirical, the actual and the real play out. Firstly, the empirical is about the observable elements of the photographer's work, the things that we can see. The act of taking photos, their equipment, the wounds that they capture in their images. These are the visible day-to-day realities of their job that we can directly observe. Secondly, looking at the actual, here we're looking at how the photographer's work plays out in real life. It considers how their thoughts and their actions are influenced by their experiences and the environment they work in. This layer goes beyond just the observable actions, just the things that we can see. It goes deeper because it's looking at the complex dynamics that are involved in their job. Lastly, the real layer looks at the underlying mechanisms and structures that influence the photographer's work. This includes things like rules and hierarchy in the medical setting. Those deeper, unseen forces have quite a significant impact on how photographers do their job. Now let's talk about ontology and epistemology in this study and where we can see critical realism at play. So in terms of ontology, this study aligns really neatly with critical realist ontology because it acknowledges that there are deeper structures at work in the world that influence our experiences and our actions. It recognises that there's more to the photographer's work than just what we can see on the surface. It's shaped by the rules, the hierarchy, and other factors in the medical setting. And looking at epistemology, in terms of how we understand the photographer's work, the study emphasises how important it is to recognise both the observable aspects, the empirical, and the underlying structures, the real, that shape their actions. And it's this holistic approach that allows us to gain a deeper understanding of the photographer's work, because it helps us consider the interplay between what we can observe and what lies beneath the surface, what we're not so readily able to observe. So through this study, we can see how critical realism offers us a framework that's really valuable for understanding the complexities of the social world, like the work of clinical photographers, because it gives us those insights into the visible and the underlying elements of their experiences. So to recap, in this video we've taken a look at critical realists, and critical realists are kind of like the activist kids in high school. They are always fighting for what's right and uncovering the hidden stuff. We had a quick recap of some key terms like paradigms, ontology and epistemology, and then we looked at the key concepts of the critical realist approach. We used the example of poverty to look at those three layers, the empirical, the actual and the real, and then we looked at an example of critical realist research on the work of clinical photographers. I hope you found this video helpful. If you did, give it a thumbs up because that helps other people find it too. Let me know your questions in the comments and be sure to check out the other videos in this series. I will link to them in the description.